Hi there, I'm Christine, and this is the Canadian Constitution Foundation's Freedom Update. Today I want to talk to you about the restrictions at Canadian airports and why it is well past time to end them. I'd also love to know what you think of the COVID-related travel restrictions at Canadian airports, so drop a comment below and I'll try to respond to as many of them as I can. If you're new here, welcome. My name is Christine and I'm the Litigation Director for the Canadian Constitution Foundation, a legal charity that fights for fundamental freedoms in Canada. I upload regular videos about our ongoing cases and about other interesting developments in constitutional law in Canada. So if that sounds like something you might be interested in, please hit like and subscribe below. It really helps my videos out a lot. And if you ring the notification bell, you will never miss one of these updates. Also, please remember that my videos are never legal advice. If you have your own legal question or problem, please consult your own lawyer. So let's talk about airports. A lot of Canada has gone back to normal, and I know it doesn't quite feel like we are back to living life the way we did in 2019 quite yet, but I do think we are getting closer. The mask mandates have ended in most places in Canada. They've even now ended where I live in Toronto for public transit, so that is a much more pleasant subway ride for me. And vaccine passports in the provinces ended quite a while ago. The US government is also no longer requiring travelers entering that country to show a negative COVID test, so it seems like things are really heading in the right direction. But one place that still feels really restrictive and kind of stuck is Canadian airports. To board a plane in Canada, you still need to show proof of vaccination, and Canadians are still required to download the ArriveCan app if they're entering the country. And just until a few days ago, the government was still requiring random COVID testing at Canadian airports for incoming travelers. On Friday, June 10th, the government did announce that they were going to pause or suspend temporarily that random testing, but they said that they are planning to bring it back on July 1st. So yeah, just in time for summer holidays when airports are expected to be even busier. So what exactly is it like at airports in Canada? Well, there are a lot of videos out there showing some scenes of chaos and what it's like. But anecdotally, I haven't traveled recently, but hearing from a lot of different people, I have been hearing that the experience varies quite a bit. So depending on where you're traveling to, what airport you're leaving from, the time of day that you're leaving, the experiences all seem to be quite different. Some airports, it seems like they don't really have any problems, and some airports have a lot of problems. And certainly it seems like if you pick the wrong airport, if you pick the wrong time of day to go, if you check a bag, your experience might be vastly different from someone flying out of a smaller airport in a smaller city. There have been a lot of problems at Toronto Pearson. I've heard of problems in Vancouver as well, and in Montreal. Last week, Air Canada actually canceled 10% of its Toronto flights. They canceled 360 flights at Pearson in the first week of June. There have been reports of really long lines at customs, of travelers who got stuck at the airport because of canceled flights. One of the most common stories that I hear is really just wildly long wait times on the tarmac to deplane once the plane has landed. I've also heard about a lot of pandemonium at baggage claim. I mean, I wouldn't know because I never travel with a checked bag, but that seems to be a really big problem as well. The travel industry says we are back to about 70% of normal volumes for this time of year, so we aren't even seeing things at full capacity. So what is the cause of all of this chaos? And it seems like there's a bunch of different problems. There have been problems with the baggage claim system. There are big problems with staffing. There's a lot of staff shortages. The industry has said also that COVID-related restrictions, things like the random testing, the ArriveCan app, the proof of vaccination policies for travelers, are also adding to these delays. One of the other things that's contributing to all of these delays is staff shortages that's actually caused by vaccine mandates for federal employees. So unvaccinated employees are not able to work at the airport, and that's resulting in staff shortages, which is resulting in longer lines. The reality is when it comes to these restrictions, it is well past time for these policies to end. And in fact, we at the Canadian Constitution Foundation, we have been saying for months that this policy is likely unconstitutional. We voiced this concern immediately when the policy was first announced at the end of August of 2021. We put out a statement. Our executive director, Joanna Barron, had a news release that said, that while we at the CCF support voluntary vaccination, government mandated proof of vaccination for domestic travel crosses a line. Canadians shouldn't have to demonstrate their vaccination status in order to travel, to see their family members, to travel within their own country, and that this policy is unjustified in light of our very high rates of vaccination. In fact, we have some of the highest rates of vaccination in the world. Our executive director, Joanna Barron, also went on to say that the government's motivation in announcing this policy just days before the writ was set to drop in the federal election was clearly intended to create a wedge issue in advance of that election. And in creating such a wedge, the government, the federal government, is running roughshod over Canadians' constitutional rights, particularly our Section 7 right to mobility and the Section 7 right to security of person. So if you'll remember back to August of 2021, I know it feels like so long ago now, but this was right before the federal election, and it struck many people, including me, as a political move designed to divide Canadians, which I think it did. So in that statement, Joanna referenced some constitutional problems with the proof of vaccination policy. First and foremost, we believe that this is an unjustified restriction on the right of Canadians to enter, remain in, and leave Canada. That's a right that's protected by Section 6 of the Canadian Charter. And the proof of vaccination policy makes it impossible for most unvaccinated Canadians to leave the country. It also makes it impossible for most unvaccinated Canadians to travel within Canada. And while there is no charter right to board an airplane, the right to take up residence in another province is in a very real way impeded for unvaccinated Canadians. For example, an unvaccinated Canadian who wants to go to Newfoundland, which is an island, is really going to have a difficult time getting there, although they would be able to take the ferry, which takes between 5 and 7 or 16 hours, depending on the port of arrival. The domestic flight restrictions on unvaccinated travelers has also had a really devastating impact on many people who work in the resource development industry. This is an industry where many workers need to be flown to job sites, and a lot of those job sites are actually only accessible by airplane. So employees like that, if they're unvaccinated, many of them have lost their jobs, and this is having a terrible financial impact on them, but it's also really negatively impacting the industry, which already, like many industries, has staffing shortages. And of course, there are also legal concerns about accommodation for people who can't be vaccinated for a medical or religious reason. For example, some people who had adverse reactions to the first dose have not been able to obtain exemptions if their reaction was not deemed severe enough. So I've heard stories of Canadians who didn't receive a second dose of a vaccine because they developed Bell's palsy, which is a temporary facial paralysis. It's a rare adverse reaction that can be caused by the COVID vaccine. Some of these patients have been denied medical exemptions because Bell's palsy was not deemed to be serious enough to justify not getting the second dose. And while, yes, Bell's palsy, in most patients, it resolves on its own, I do really understand why someone who experienced facial paralysis for months would not want a second dose of the medication that caused that, even though that is a very rare side effect, and for most people, the vaccine is totally safe. There's also a need to create religious exemptions for people who can't be vaccinated for a religious reason. And now I do think that the airlines I've heard that they are granting religious exemptions. At least they're doing it more now than they were a few months ago. And I think this is good, although realistically this policy should just completely end. They do need to grant exemptions for human rights reasons, as well as because in implementing a government policy, the airlines need to implement that policy in a constitutionally compliant way, and they can't discriminate against someone on the basis of their religious belief. There's actually a document that the government prepared that shows how and when exemptions can apply. I'll post a link to that document as well below if you want to read the whole thing. But one thing in this document that really stands out is the exemption for unvaccinated inmates being transferred by aircraft. So an unvaccinated prisoner can travel by plane, but an unvaccinated mother can't fly to her daughter's wedding. An unvaccinated oil field worker can't fly to his work site. An unvaccinated person in Newfoundland who needs to leave the province for medical care, I guess they can just take the ferry for 5 to 7 or 16 hours. There's some pretty strange priorities that this Trudeau government has. Now, one person who has been fighting back against this policy is Conservative Member of Parliament Melissa Lantsman. She represents the riding of Thornhill, and I recently spoke to Melissa on my television program Canadian Justice. So here's a clip from that episode. Welcome back to Canadian Justice, where I'm discussing the current chaos at Canadian airports with MP Melissa Lantsman. Melissa, I wanted to dig into the causes of some of these delays and disruptions. Can you describe what some of those causes are, in particular as it relates to the COVID measures that are still in place in Canada?
For sure. And I'll start by saying we are an outlier, particularly on this one measure, and we've still got domestic travel mandates. So if for whatever reason you chose not to get vaccinated, you actually can't get on an airplane. You can't get on a train. You can't get on a federally regulated piece of infrastructure, although there are some weird anomalies in that when it comes to ferries. But we are
just on that, like I was looking at the document yesterday that shows the exemptions. I think federal inmates being transferred are not required to be vaccinated necessarily in order to board an airplane, which I think might be upsetting for some.
Yeah, I find it completely offensive. We've got people that have, they've missed weddings and they've missed funerals and they haven't seen their families. We treat travel, I think, as a luxury for a lot of us, particularly those who live in Toronto like I do. But for a lot of people, this is a necessity, and we sort of forget that in a country as vast as ours. So we still got mandates. We still got mandates on federally regulated employees. So that's the entire public service, which includes CASA, which you probably now has become part of your lexicon. Those are the security people at the airport for CBSA. So we've got a whole bunch of people that could come back to work, presumably if they're still wanting to do this, that could come back to work. So we're missing people there. We still have about 4,000 tests a day happening at Pearson. That's the random test. There's a little bit of arts and crafts going on at the airport, where you come and you get a sticker and it's either red or green and then you're shifted into these lines, but that all takes manpower and people. And so there are people that are randomly testing still within the airport. And I'll have to say that it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me and why we're doing it, because you get a test in the airport, but you're not quarantining, you're going home and you don't know if you have COVID. So I'm not sure exactly what they're doing this, but I think the key here is that we have continued to ask the government for specific health advice that they are getting to justify these measures. And I've asked probably about 30 times in a public forum, and we haven't gotten a single shred of evidence, not from the cabinet minister, not from the prime minister, not from any members who often do their bidding on nightly panels. We haven't gotten a single piece of evidence from any health expert that says these measures are actually keeping us safe, and that's the problem.
So one of the things that stood out to me is obviously the federal minister of transport has been asked about these delays, and one of the causes that he named was rusty travelers, people who forget to remove their laptop from their bag, or forget that they're not supposed to bring water, to put their toiletries in a clear bag. So he's given that as an explanation. How accurate is that as a contributing factor to these delays?
So here's the rule as a politician. When you've abdicated your responsibility to make sure that our airports are working, you probably shouldn't blame the constituent, the voter, the traveler for I think, your incompetence. And I think that's exactly what we saw. And we saw it sort of across the board, where we had the parliamentary secretary, the person that sort of does the minister's bidding in Parliament when he doesn't want to, or when he can't, I should say. And they were blaming the industry for these delays. These are problems at security. They're problems at CBSA. They're problems that are the legacy health restrictions are causing, and they're certainly not the traveler. This is, I have to say, the Pearson problem is not Pearson. It is not the workers there. It is not the staff people. It is not air traffic control. It's not the baggage handlers. It is the federal government who needs to make this place work, that has abdicated their responsibility to do so.
So I've noticed a shift from industry who, for a long time, supported a lot of the measures that were in place. A lot of Canadians supported it. But recently we've seen sort of a shift from industry saying that they too want to see things sort of go back to normal. So what can you tell us about what industry in the airline industry, airports, the travel industry in general is saying about ending these restrictions? We've got about a minute.
Yeah, look, I think they've seen the writing on the wall for the rest of the world, and they've seen the rest of the world and provinces and places within our own within our own daily lives. You can go to a baseball game, you can go to the playoffs in a hockey game if you're lucky to live in a city where they're actually in the playoffs. And you don't need to be vaccinated. So this is sort of the last bastion of grasping to, I think, what is ideological, what is a bit vindictive, what is punishing to domestic travelers, and they finally had enough.
Right.
This industry has been attacked, so I think they're I think they're finally speaking up.
So you might be wondering what we are doing at the Canadian Constitution Foundation about this issue of travel restrictions in Canada. So I have been consulting with some of our external lawyers about this issue, and we are looking seriously about bringing a case to challenge the restrictions, because I think enough is enough. This policy is not justified, and it's certainly not justified on the current facts where we know that the vaccines are not stopping transmission of this virus. I've always said that I support voluntary vaccination and that vaccination is a good choice for most people. But we also know that the vaccines are not stopping transmission, that hospitals are not overwhelmed by COVID patients, and that airports are in complete disarray. The government has not provided evidence of why this policy is still in place or if it's doing anything useful, if it's achieving anything at all. The onus is on the government to justify why they are restricting our movement within this country. Our vaccination rate is extremely high in this country. Government proof of vaccination policies have ended in basically every other context. Other provinces have conceded that if people didn't get vaccinated already, continuing to keep these policies in force is not incentivizing them to go out and do it now. So why is the federal government holding on to these restrictions then if everyone else has given them up? I don't know the answer to that. The government's not telling us the answer to that. If you have an idea of why you think the federal government might still be holding on to these restrictions, drop a comment below and let me know what you think. So we have been doing these consultations with some of our external lawyers, and our plan now is to see if this latest round of restrictions gets renewed on July 1st. The government has said that that's when they're planning on bringing back random testing. But our hope is that if we all come together and we put enough pressure on the government, they drop these restrictions instead. And of course, you can also sign up for our Freedom Updates at the ccf.ca/freedom updates. And that way you will stay informed about all our work, including our work on these travel restrictions, our work challenging the federal government over their use of the Emergencies Act. You can stay up to date on our work on property rights and free expression and on medical choice. And you can always subscribe to this channel as well, where I provide regular updates about all our work. Okay, that's all for today. Thanks for watching, and let's keep fighting for freedom in Canada.